Hello again. Welcome to another short video courtesy of investingsuccess.ca. Today is the 12th of November, 2023. Here's a chart that will keep you up at night. It might even bring back some memories. It certainly does for me. What this chart shows is the percentage of earnings that consumers typically save. And you can see 1975 was the peak, and the savings rate in that year was over 15%. I can recall in that era, I was a kid growing up, I can recall my dad going to a car dealership and getting a new truck. Um, he either wrote a personal check or paid cash. There was no credit cards, at least in my household. There was no bank loans. Everything was saved, and when you had enough money saved, you made a big purchase. Now, some people will tell you, and rightly so, that the mid-70s marked a significant tipping point. Up until then, an average man could have a job and he would make enough money to buy the groceries and support his family and save a little bit of money. But the inflation that ran rampant in the early 1970s really put a damper on that. And then the wage increases that were constrained in order to control inflation put another damper on the consumer. And it got to the point in, as this chart shows, 1975, when the savings rate peaked. And since 1975, the savings rate has gone one way, down. The financial crisis of 2007, 2008 marked the pinnacle of this declining savings. Going into that financial crisis, if you could look in a mirror and as you exhaled, if you could make the mirror fog, and if you had any kind of a pulse at all, wow, lucky you. You could qualify for a mortgage. That was the height of stupidity, and that was the height of sloppiness. That was the height of lending. The economy very nearly buckled under that crisis. Central bankers had to step in and they had to start spending. And they did. They called it quantitative easing, QE. There was different stages of QE, QE1, QE2, QE3. They plowed money into the financial system. The markets went up. The markets loved it. To the average consumer, yes, they probably saw their mutual funds and their stocks going up, and they no doubt sold some of them to get money for purchases. And the net result of all of this, QE, was a slight increase in the savings rate. And then along came our good friend COVID. Central bankers again had their backs to the wall. They had to pump untold billions, trillions almost, into the market, into the system. It was either that or the entire economy was going to collapse on itself. So the new mantra became stay home, sit on your ass, conduct your business on Zoom. The government will give you some stimulus money. You're going to get paid by your employer as well. Savings naturally increased. But then, as COVID came to an end and people started going back to work, savings rates started to decline. Here and now, we have a savings rate of about 3.4%. That's a pretty paltry level. Last time we had savings rates that low was back in 2004. Now you got to remember that the gross domestic product, the GDP, comprises consumer spending, investment, government spending, and your net exports. In America, 70% of your gross domestic product is the consumer. America relies on consumer spending. But what's going to happen now as savings rates go down, interest rates are going up, it's harder and harder to get a mortgage at a decent level, it's harder and harder to get a bank loan. Liquidity is being drained out of the system. I say we're headed for trouble. A declining savings rate is never a good thing in any economy. To finish off the story, take a look at these two characters, Jerome Powell on the left, Janet Yellen on the right. Look at the expressions on their faces. Look at Jerome Powell. I mean, that's a frown, if there ever was one. That man is not happy. And look at his arms crossed in a defensive posture. That man has seen something or heard something that really did not sit well with him. Look at Janet Yellen, deer in the headlights, stunned. What just happened? November 3rd, there was a U.S. government debt auction, and it proved to be a whole lot worse than what everybody was expecting. There was $40 billion of 10-year Treasury notes that sold with a yield to maturity of 4.5%. They were expecting something like 3.8% or better. Now, confidence is waning. The U.S. is sitting on massive debt, $32 trillion. Old man Joe and his Bidenomics. That's just a code word for spend more money. Big deficit spending. Not good. Dysfunctional politics, getting rid of the Speaker of the House. Struggling to find a replacement. They seemingly just cannot get their act together on Capitol Hill. Investors are taking note of that. Messy foreign policy, strained relations with China, relations are strained with Russia. I think relations are maybe even getting strained with Israel. Israel's not listening to the U.S. Israel is going to go it alone. They're going to try to kick the living bejesus out of Hamas. This could spread all through the Middle East. The U.S. is warning of that. Israel's not listening. So now you got foreign policy that's compromised. Investors are taking note. They're saying, hey, we'll buy your debt, but we need more in the way of compensation because you guys in the U.S. are becoming very risky. That's not good. But yet, here's the S&P 500 year to date, up 15%. But if things are not good, how is the S&P up 15%? Well, to be very honest, this is not a chart of the S&P 500. This largely is a chart of 7, some people say 9, big name tech stocks that have largely driven the direction of the market. And these big name tech stocks are very much tied and meshed to the consumer. The consumer can't live without these tech stocks. Investors know that. Investors know that as long as the consumer can't live without these stocks, there is going to be at least predictable earnings coming from these companies. Netflix, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, Google Alphabet. I don't have to name them. You know who they are. And so this is what the financial media likes to talk about. They like to say, oh my goodness, the economy is robust. But yet, in the same breath, I've heard the people on Bloomberg lamenting that when is the Fed going to cut rates? Interest rates are too high. Mortgage rates on a 30-year fixed are 8%. So there's cross currents out there. Something's wrong. Yes, and something is wrong. This chart is not reflective of the overall economy. Not even close. This is the chart that tells the story. This is the Russell 2000. It's made up of 2,000 smaller cap stocks. To the end of October 2023, this thing was down 5.4%. This is what the economy is all about. Small cap companies are struggling. They're having to refinance their debt at higher rates. They're having to pay their workers more money to keep them. Consumers are strapped. The cost of borrowing at the consumer level has gone up. So are you going to buy a new kitchen sink? Are you going to buy a new washing machine? Maybe not. You might postpone that. This is the real America right here. Negative 5.4% to the end of October. Not a good situation. I've done some astrology type work on the Russell 2000 index, and it traces its origination to January 1, 1984. That was a Sunday. So why would they start the index on a Sunday? Well, so that they could start gathering data on the Monday or whenever the markets opened after the January 1 holiday. And the data on these 2,000 stocks, as of, let's say, January 2nd, 1984, was the data that was used to compile the index. Now, I've done some work with the periodogram Fourier transform function, and I've determined that the Russell 2000 actually aligns to cycles that are 108, 126, 152, 177, all the way up to 511 trading day cycles. And in one of my recent newsletters for subscribers, I actually showed how these various intervals, these cyclical intervals, align to turning points on the Russell 2000. I've also discovered that on January 1, 1984, when this index was started, the midheaven in New York City at 11 o'clock in the morning was in Sagittarius. And at that hour, on that day, Moon and Jupiter were actually at the midheaven as well. That's why that particular day was picked to start this index. None of these first trade dates, IPO dates, are accidental. They all have got a method to their madness. And by picking particular dates with particular planetary arrangements, that is the hidden language that some of these insiders who know astrology are using. To illustrate my point, take a look at this chart. Since the middle of 22, it's been trading in a very broad sideways channel. But look what happens. Every time it either gets to the top of the channel, the bottom of the channel, or near the bottom, there's always an aspect involving Moon. Either the Moon is at the natal 1984 ascendant, or it's at the natal Mars, or it's 90 degrees to the natal ascendant, and so on and so forth. There is a pattern, a rhythm. There is a predictability to this Russell 2000. Now, what I'm looking to see is, can this thing pick itself up off the floor? After the end of October, it tried. It really, really tried to rally, but it took a look at that 38.2% retracement level, and it said, no, not yet, not ready to go yet. And it's been pulling back. What I'm looking for is certainly one of these Hearst cycles and an astrology event to both manifest as this thing goes through the 38% retracement level. When I see that, and when I also see something like a stochastic or the true strength index give me a signal that the trend is becoming bullish, then I'm going to be all over this Russell 2000 index. And there are ETFs that allow you to buy this thing. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the big guys going into the end of the year or early in the new year start to buy this thing. Because if they get it at these depressed levels, and if they decide to push it up to retest even something close to the recent highs, they're going to make money. And so I just need to catch it as they are starting to make this thing go. And I'm going to be using, as I say, the Hearst cycles, the astrology, the Fibonacci retracements. Okay, so that is basically it. So again, the point is the savings rate in America and other Western countries is dropping. Consumers are in trouble. The S&P has been driven by 7, 9, call it what you want, a handful of stocks. The Russell 2000 tells you the real story. Things are not good out there. It wasn't that long ago that we had the Silicon Valley Bank failure. I mean, things really are not that good. So be very, very careful before you start plowing money into these markets. Just understand what you're getting yourself into. And on that sour note, visit me at investingsuccess.ca. Take a look at some of my reports. You'll find me on Substack. You'll find me on Udemy. The Financial Astrology Almanac is in final edit stage right now, and we want to get that out into the world in December, which is not that far away. Alrighty, thank you kindly for watching and listening today. I appreciate it, and we will talk real soon. Take care.